Good evening and welcome to For the Record. The Prime Minister, Waringa Bainimarama, has recently returned from official visits to Australia and New Zealand. He in fact opened a trade expo in Australia, signalling what could be Fiji's most in-depth and most meaningful re-engagement on a business level, on a trade and bilateral relation level with Australia and New Zealand, to see what the future potentials are and how we can go from here. I am joined in studio tonight by the Permanent Secretary for Industry and Trade, Mr. Shaheen Ali, and Fiji's Consul General and Trade Commissioner to Australia, Zarak Khan. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the show, and good evening. I'll begin with you, Mr. Ali. The Prime Minister, when he was in Australia, basically laid the platform that with all that's happened between Australia and Fiji, trade has never really been an issue of contention so far as wanting to trade with Australia. How has the framework changed, given that the Prime Minister went over? He spoke with government ministers, met with business people. What's the sentiment now?
Well, the most importantly, I think, Edwin, was that the fact that the Trade and Investment Symposium was a key part of his visit. And it was upon his suggestion that we schedule the Trade and Investment Symposium to coincide with his visit. That's for him to show to the Australian government and the Australian public that Fiji was very much, as usual, considered Australia as an important trade and investment partner, and we were ready to also increase the interaction. And he particularly made the point that he was now the foreign minister also, and he wanted to see a trade playing a central element in the bilateral relations between Fiji and Australia. He talked about the potential, the growth path that Fiji is on, and the opportunities that are available for Australians in Fiji in various sectors. And of course the symposium itself targeted agriculture, ICT, and tourism. The focus was very much to grow this business relationship, because of already the advantages Fiji and Australia has of understanding each other, knowing each other, being in each other's neighborhood, and having this long-standing relationship where there's a good understanding, business to business, and also through tourism, and a good relations overall.
Zarak, I suppose this is where you come into the picture as a trade commissioner. It's your job now to continue the engagement and to see how we can actually see some tangible movement following up from the symposium and the Prime Minister's visit.
That's correct. I think it's an exciting opportunity for Fiji, particularly with the consulate also being designated as a trade commission now. I think one of the key feedback that we have been receiving from Australian investors is that they haven't considered Fiji as an investment or business destination in the past. They've primarily seen Fiji as a holiday destination, and that can be seen in the record number of tourist arrivals that we receive every year from Australia. So I think we were very privileged to have the Honourable Prime Minister come down to Sydney and to meet with the Australian business community. The key audience that we were targeting were in particular those businesses and senior executives who didn't know about Fiji as a business destination. So they don't have business interests here, but they were potential investors that we could convince or persuade to consider Fiji as an investment destination. So I think we're quite fortunate to have a number of very prominent speakers during the symposium, such as Mr. Lang Walker from the Walker Corporation, who is the owner of the Kokomo Island Resort that will be opened in Kandavu early next year. We also had Mr. Robert Crome from Kukai, Australia, who is also Fijian as well. And we also had Mr. Dakshesh Patel from Mesh and Bar in Australia, and Bruce and Abby Leeson from the Ginger People. So these were Australian investors, some also Fijian, who were basically talking about the experience about doing business in Fiji, having business interests here, as well as investing in Australia, and strengthening the trade and investment relationship between the two countries.
I'd like to pick up more about strengthening trade relations, but following on from the symposium, all these people meeting and mingling and networking, have we piqued their interest?
Our office at the moment is receiving a number of interests from the attendees from the symposium. In fact, what we're doing at the moment is we're calling each of the 150 delegates or attendees who participated in the symposium. We're following up with them, getting their views in terms of the information that was presented to them, what sort of assistance and guidance they need. We're trying to connect them as well to the government agencies that participated in the symposium, such as the Fiji Revenue and Customs Authority, Reserve Bank of Fiji, Investment Fiji, to name a few, and as well as connecting them with potential joint venture partners in Fiji. So we also had other companies like Vodafone Fiji, Telecom Fiji, ANZ that had participated.
Mr. Ali, going back to the point of relations, or on a trade level at least, bilaterally, where do things stand at the moment? Because we have been trading with Australia. There has been movement of goods and services, but not to the extent that it potentially could be.
No, that's the point where we've seen a need to have a trade commission in Sydney, because whilst Australia has been one of our key trading partners, the potential has not been fully explored. If you look at individual states of Australia, apart from New South Wales, such as Victoria and Queensland, they have economies bigger than New Zealand. But if you look at trade figures, and if you look at our trade with Australia, our exports to Australia, if you take away the key exports of gold, TCF, and sweet biscuits, then the figures between Australia and New Zealand is almost the same, which does not sort of reflect on the vast economy of Australia. So there's enormous potential. Of course, Australia is also going through a transformation where they're shifting from a manufacturing economy to a predominantly a services type of economy. And most of these manufacturing is being outsourced to Asia. Now, Fiji is in a good spot right now to take on some of these small, medium enterprises that are outsourcing. We are flexible, we understand the Australian market, we know we have quick turnover, we are also have a very qualified workforce, and we are just a few hours away. So given that, there's enormous potential to tap into this opportunities that Australia offers and increase our trade figures, not just in relation to tourism and services, but we have a potential to increase our exports into Australia, and not only that, but to export more high value products, products that have value addition done in Fiji.
The sectors that do export, gold, TCF would be the one that most Fijians would be interested in, employing thousands of people. I'd like to get into that, but that's going to come up after the break. Right now, we have to take a break. Good evening and welcome back to the show. My guests tonight are the Permanent Secretary for Industry and Trade, Mr. Shaheen Ali, and Fiji's Consul General and Trade Commissioner to Australia, Zarak Khan. We're talking about the potential that exists between Fiji, Australia, and soon to be discussed New Zealand in terms of trade. Mr. Ali, the TCF, textile, clothing and footwear, at one point under Spartica, I understand Fiji was enjoying the prime of its life in terms of exporting clothing goods and garments to Australia and what have you. But then things changed, the playing field changed, and came to a point where the industry had to very quickly adapt itself to stay competitive. What is the potential for TCF at the moment?
Things did change, and it changed because of competition, international competition. With Spartica, we had a high margin of preference, but slowly the preferences eroded. So the industry declined, but we're quick to adapt. We see now in terms of employment, it had declined to a few thousand. It is now increasing to 6,000 or 7,000, and Australia remains the main export destination TCF sector. The Trade Commissioner mentioned earlier on that one of the speakers was Rob Chrome, who owns Kukai. And Kukai actually has an establishment in Colombo Tax-Free Zone and exports high-end women's garments, fashions. So you can see that from cut, make, trim industry, which was sort of based on volume, we are now value adding, venturing into fashion. We provide NRL, AFL jerseys, but we do it in quick turnaround time. We do it in volumes that are required by Australian market, and the potential is that we will continue to sort of tap into the fashion market, the uniforms market in Australia. So the potential for growth is immense for both Australia and New Zealand, and also with regards to footwear, because our advantage is our people, the cost structure, the quick turnaround time, as I said, and government is actively sort of pursuing these tax-free zones. The last budget, the Minister for Economy had announced a services and manufacturing park in Lautoka, for example. Now that would entail setting up of infrastructure to make it easy for companies to come and invest, basically not have to worry about anything, just bring their machines, plug it in and start rolling their operations. And plus, Fiji has earned, and not just by government's effort, the industry has contributed to that as a trustworthy destination for quality, for being cost effective, and for delivering in time.
Mr. Khan, we're talking about Fiji seen, at least in TCF, as a highly competitive and high-end sort of nation. But when you have these new investors who come to your office, what are they interested in? What sort of questions do they ask? What do they need to know and want to know about Fiji?
We have two distinct type of investors who basically come to our office seeking assistance or information. The first is the former Fijian, who's basically left our shores a number of years ago and has done very well in Australia in terms of either owning a business or working for large corporations. And throughout that time, they've managed to generate considerable savings, and they're looking to invest that money. Through these initiatives, such as the symposiums and other events that the Trade Commission organizes, we're able to appeal to the former Fijians or the Fijian diaspora that are in Australia to consider coming back home. And I think that's a plea and that's an argument that resonates quite well amongst them. They still have a passion for Fiji. They're very sentimental about Fiji when they think about home. And so that is one type of investor that comes across to us. They're interested in investing in different sectors based on their professional experience and expertise back in Australia. The other type of investor is basically the non-Fijian or the Australian investors, and they basically come from different segments of Australian society, and they're interested in investing in tourism, in manufacturing, in ICT, agriculture, different sectors as well. What we've been trying to do is basically connect the dots, build awareness and share information about the consistent and stable government policies that we have in Fiji, the excellent incentives that we have, and basically what are the future plans of development in the country in terms of investment in infrastructure, human capital, etc. This information is not widely available in Australia. That's why Fiji is quite privileged to actually have a trade commission, and the government has the foresight and vision to invest in an institution such as that. So I think as part of the work we've been doing as follow-up from the symposium, ICT and agriculture have stood out in particular. ICT because of the fact that we've got reputable companies in Fiji such as Mindpearl and ANZ who have done quite well. Mindpearl at the moment has 1,200 people working at the facility at the Colombo Tax-Free Zone, and they've got contracts for 14 international brands, and they're quite well known, such as Malaysian Airlines, for example, iSelect, which is an Australian company, DHL Express, etc. We've also got ANZ Suva Hub, which is a subsidiary of the ANZ Banking Corporation from Australia and New Zealand. They've got approximately 300 to 400 people working in Colombo Tax-Free Zone, and they do higher-end business process outsourcing. So the acting chief executive officer from ANZ Fiji, as well as the commercial director for Asia Pacific from Mindpearl, were able to present at the symposium that we had. present on the offerings that they have in Fiji. They were able to basically verify and confirm that Fiji has world-class infrastructure when it comes to fiber optic connectivity and internet. We also have a very good and talented English-speaking workforce, which have neutral accents. They're very good for ICT industries. And we also have very favorable time zone advantages as well, particularly when we're servicing the European market or the North American market, and a whole heap of other geographic and natural advantages that we can take advantage of. But it's all a matter of ensuring that we can come up with a very coherent marketing package. So at the moment, the government is, through the Trade Commission, is working on an ICT marketing strategy, which we've spoken to the Permanent Secretary and the Minister for Trade about. What we'd like to do is ensure that we can position Fiji for the future. We can articulate and promote these key advantages that we have in the Australian market as well as in the New Zealand market, and try and get more Australian and New Zealand companies to come up and set up their ICT operations here, because this is a crucial employment generating sector for the economy that we have.
And with that, we've come to the end of another segment. We'll be back shortly. Pulawanaka, and welcome back to the show. Mr. Ali, just going back to the Prime Minister's visit, that basically sent the message home to Australia, all the history that we had politically and between our governments has nothing to do with trade, should not be allowed to get in the way of businesses being able to connect and do business at the end of the day. But going forward, when we talk about trade with Australia, are we looking at more government involvements from both sides in terms of more agreements, more formal engagement?
The less government involvement, the better, but more private sector to private sector involvement. We have the Fiji-Australia Business Council, Australia-Fiji Business Council. We have our Trade Commissioner. There is the Pacific Trade and Invest Office. There is the Australian Tradecom also. So the government's role is matchmaking and also ensuring that the processes and the systems are streamlined and user-friendly. So if there's any impediments, for example, that's where the government can come in to look at those systems and processes. For example, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Tourism heads a very high level, with all the relevant permanent secretaries represented, a committee that looks at key investments from countries like Australia and New Zealand that are facing difficulties, sort of handholds them, ensures that wherever the impediments are, with whichever department, is quickly addressed. So the government's role is a facilitative one, and creating that conducive environment for investments to take place. Now, in terms of the future, the conditions are very favorable for investments to take place, because our economies are very complementary to each other, like I said, stages of production. We are not competing destinations, but are able to cooperate and contribute to global value chains. So, there would be collaboration between where, Fiji could, say, do the manufacturing component with designs supplied by Australia. So that sort of collaboration can happen. There could be, as the Trade Commissioner was talking about, ICT, where business processes, services centers could be outsourced to Fiji, and we could be a hub to supply manufactured goods, not just products like articles like TCF, but also food products. Agriculture has huge potential in both Australia and New Zealand. We just need to have it more on a commercial basis. Technical assistance is required for that, but that step is not a very difficult one.
One of the issues foreign investors have had with Fiji, and something that the government has tried to work on over time, is the processes involved in registering in Fiji. We keep hearing about a one-stop shop, and I think there has been some progress on this front, especially with all the stakeholders involved. But your ministry would obviously have an interest in this, in ensuring that when people do want to come in and they want to spend their money here and set up business, that it's as easy as possible. Has there been any progress on this front?
Yes, there's been a lot of developments, a lot of progress on this. The single window registration system with Investment Fiji basically now sort of puts on an electronic platform the ability to register your business, get approval from Investment Fiji, Reserve Bank, FIRCA, and the Registrar of Companies without actually coming to Fiji. There are many other agencies that are digitizing their processes, like the Registrar of Companies, the Registrar of Titles. FECA has almost automated their services. We recently tabled in the Parliament the WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement, which is all about improving systems and processes by incorporating technical assistance from donor countries like World Bank. So there has been a concerted effort to encourage greater coordination and also streamline systems and processes. So this is where government comes in to improve the general business environment, and also actively the Trade Commissioner was talking about bankable projects. So the government is taking a different approach. Rather than going and saying, come and invest in our agricultural sector, we have taken the approach now to take concrete project proposals, like a dairy industry investment proposal in Rewa, for example, or in Navua, with most of the groundwork done, land identified, and other sort of approvals already done, so that investor does not have to run around a lot and become disinterested in investing. So that type of proactive approach is being taken also by the government. This is to ensure that that we really sort of realize the vision that Prime Minister has to make trade, economic relations the focus of our bilateral relations.
These sort of tailor-made packages that you just mentioned, dairy as an example, what other proposals are you taking around in Australia? What are the sectors?
At the moment, I've been talking to the Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, for example, Fiji Export Council, TLTB, the Land Bank. So there's a number of partnerships that the Trade Commission and the Ministry of Trade is trying to basically take advantage of. And this is where the proposals are coming from. So basically, the TLTB, for example, is working with the local landowners to identify land that is suitable for tourism projects, which Australian investors can come in and basically provide the capital for, in terms of constructing hotels or other types of activities. So that's just an example. We also are working with Fiji Commerce and Employers Federation, as I mentioned, to talk to their membership in terms of any ideas that they have for certain projects where they're looking for funding for. And Australia can be a significant source of capital funding to try and drive these projects. So this is at a very early stage at the moment. We'd like to build upon this work, and with the support of the ministry, we have been quite successful in getting some early leads, which we're working on at the moment, and hopefully we can convert that into some tangible results come 2017.
And I suppose with that we have to take another break. We'll be back shortly. Good evening, welcome back to For the Record. Mr. Ali, when the Prime Minister addressed these businesses, and he was speaking with some government ministers as well, he spent quite a length of time on PESA Plus and how this very important agreement is sort of holding us back, not just Fiji and Australia, but the rest of the Pacific and Australia and New Zealand as well. While we have this symposium, while we have the Trade Commission going around and trying to sort of enhance our trade, we still have PESA Plus on the back of our minds. It's sort of the elephant in the room. How is this playing into government strategies now?
Well, he did not say it was holding us back. You said what...
he did not say that.
Yeah.
No, he didn't. But the general understanding is such.
But you asked a very pertinent question. What is government's role in increasing trade and investment between two countries? And one of these roles, I talked about creating a conducive environment, but creating these frameworks, for example, to take place, is also an important government-to-government role, to create an instrument like PESA Plus, or negotiate an instrument like PESA Plus, that eases the movement of goods, services, investment, and capital at the end of the day. So PESA Plus will become the focus when we talk about trade between Fiji and the Pacific and Australia and New Zealand. What the Prime Minister said, that the agreement must work for us. It shouldn't be an agreement that everyone commits to, and then the agreement is set aside and businesses have to go outside the framework of PESA Plus. This has happened in the region. Pacific Island country trade agreement, for example. A number of countries have still yet to commit to that, and for Fiji, the Pacific Island countries are the largest export destination. Now, most of these gains are through the MSG trade agreement, but some of them are outside these trade agreements. So we don't want that to happen with regards to Australia and New Zealand. We have the opportunity here now, because the agreement is not signed yet, and everything is on the table until the final signatures are put, to make this the best deal possible. And by best deal, Fiji is very much interested in the development cooperation, and the development aspects, which should be the center of the agreement, and the flexibilities accorded to countries like Fiji and the Pacific Island countries, because our economies are not at the same place right now. We need some of these policy tools that the PESA Plus may try to discipline, to ensure that we reach the stage of development where Australia and New Zealand is right now. So Prime Minister's message was that there's no way we have withdrawn from the negotiation. We want to talk. We want to talk within the context of our regional partners, which is the Forum Island countries. We can even talk bilaterally. We did have, after Prime Minister's words, that did open the door to Minister, for example, having very good discussions with the Australian Minister, and at officials level we had very good bilateral discussions as to how we can take it forward. So what Fiji is doing at the moment in relation to PESA Plus, and with the approval of the Prime Minister, of course, and the Minister for Industry, Trade and Tourism, is trying to ensure that PESA Plus works for us and works for the not just Fiji but the Forum Island countries, and is also beneficial to Australia and New Zealand, because if you see, this is the only treaty that binds the island countries, and Australia and New Zealand essentially has the potential to create an economic union in the region. So it must be done right. If it's not done right, then it's it's counterproductive to be part of any agreement that doesn't work.
Come the day that PESA Plus is signed and adopted and comes into being, so to speak, how would that then tie into all these increased trade that the Fiji government is working on between Australia and New Zealand? Are we talking about a sort of open table, opening up horizons?
No, it will provide surety. It will provide market certainty for investors, for example, for movement of services. It will ensure that there is a stable legal framework for trade and investments to take place. Not that there is none at the moment, but it will provide a higher degree of certainty. What Pay Surplus does is also has a very favorable rules of origin, much better than what Spartica currently has. So it will provide better access into Australia and New Zealand. It has a SPS chapter which is related to quarantine, so it will provide better market access as far as SPS is concerned. So these are the potential gains that we will have. As far as our defensive interest, we won't commit everything. So there's areas where Fiji is still trying to develop our agricultural sector, for example, our dairy sector, for example. So those ones would be protected in a sense in terms of our market access offers. So which is why it is imperative that whatever Fiji puts forward as a position needs to be taken into account, because there's wide degree of consideration that needs to be given before you enter into something that is that concrete, because the agreement is for the lifetime and we need to get it right in the first place.
Let's come back to Fiji and Australia. Mr. Khan, we've spoken about the story that we are telling about Fiji to investors. Are you getting some sort of feedback from people who are already on the ground on some of the issues that we need to address, some of the areas that we need to look at and improve on, because we want to bring in more investors, and which is likely to work in Fiji's benefit? What sort of feedback are you getting?
I think one of the key areas that we're working with the different ministries on at the moment is in the area of upskilling our labor force. Certain industries have specific requirements in terms of the type of skill sets that they require. I think the TCF sector is a good example. At the moment, the TCF Council of Fiji will be participating at an international exhibition next week, which we'll be supporting in Melbourne, called the International Sourcing Fair. So this is where basically 500 exhibitors from around the world, including fashion labels, designer labels, as well as fashion companies, come and basically build business-to-business connections. And one of the things that we're trying to do in terms of supporting the council is positioning Fiji to promote high-end manufacturing. And I think Kukai is a good example of that, but we've also got other companies that have come in over the past few years, or very recently, called Scanlon and Theodore, and some others as well. What we're finding is that the workers or the labor force requirements for these companies are very high. They require workers who at least have 2 years of training to do the sophisticated garment manufacturing that they require. So I think it requires a partnership with the tertiary institutions in Fiji and the training providers to ensure that we're providing these training opportunities to interested people or students that are out there, so that we can make that connection between what's needed in the job market in terms of these employers and investments with what is provided and the training that is provided. So I think that's a key area that we need to work on. The other area that we need to work on, and I think this is primarily in the Australian market, is positioning Fiji and the Fijian brand. One thing we're doing at the ministry is quite strongly pushing for the Fijian Made initiative. Fijian Made, Fijian Grown, Fijian Packed. So there's about 7 or 8 different labels that we have. What we're trying to do in Australia is attach certain values to this Fijian Made brand. And one of them is trying to appeal to the ethical consumer in Australia. And I think that's something that we can have a very strong advantage in, particularly noting that we come from a beautiful island. The environment is very pristine. We have very good working conditions for our workforce. We pay decent wages. There's sustainable production that is happening in Fiji, and these are values that need to be clearly articulated in the Australian market. And the advantage of that is that we can get a very premium price for the products that we provide to the Australian market, and the Australian consumers are really looking for these type of products. And I think, as the Permanent Secretary mentioned earlier, one of the greatest assets that we have is our people, and Australians have a strong affinity for Fijians because they visit our shows in droves and numbers.
They're familiar with who Fijians are. Okay, and with that, we've ended yet another segment. When we come back, we'll be wrapping up for the night. Good evening and welcome back. Our last segment for this evening. Very quickly, Mr. Ali, as we wrap up tonight, looking at investment levels right now, if I remember correctly, China now is the biggest foreign investor in terms of work on the ground. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. The more, the better. But what are the levels for Australia, and where would you want it to be?
That's a good question. If you look at registration of investments, China is at the moment the largest investment source, but the conversion rate, if you look at that, then traditional investment sources have a higher rate of conversion. But yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that Australian investment has declined, but we see it as a cyclical thing, and there is, judging by the interest there is and the potential, this will soon pick up, and there is potential for Australia to become #1 investment destination again, with the good work that Zarak is already putting in place. There's many sectors that both Australia and New Zealand could invest in. With New Zealand, of course, the agricultural industry is an important and a natural sort of investment destination. With Australia, we see some of the manufacturing, and as Zarak was mentioning, the ICT sector as being possibly linked to some of the corporations providing business process outsourcing and other services.
Mm-hmm. And Zarak, just finally, very quickly for you, what are the top 3 things on the wish list for the Trade Commission?
I think, as the Perm Secretary has mentioned, one thing that we're prioritizing is trying to turn the tide in terms of the declining Australian investments that are coming to Fiji, and that requires a concerted effort. And as I mentioned earlier, we're very thankful for the visit by the Prime Minister to Sydney over the last few weeks. That has really helped to create a very positive buzz around Fiji. What we're trying to do is have a very methodical approach in terms of promoting the Fijian brand as a brand that is associated with very premium value. And so that means trying to focus on ensuring that we can get investments in high-end manufacturing, in terms of progressing our way up the value chain for ICT services. So we started with contact centers, with call centers, but we'd like to do higher-end type of work in business process outsourcing, digitization, for example, and some other ICT services as well. So it's all about having the stakeholders work together from the Fijian end, and this is one of the main reasons why the Ministry is quite committed to building partnerships with the different government agencies as well as the private sector, so that we can come in together and promote the Fijian brand, not just in Australia, but also in New Zealand and some of the other markets that are key to growing our economy.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on For the Record. That's all the time we have tonight. Best of luck in the future, and hopefully sometime down the line we can sit here and talk about how Australian investments have skyrocketed. And with that, we have come to the end of For the Record. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Remember, if you have comments or questions, you can email us fortherecord@fbc.com.fj. From me, good night. But up next, the My Say segment with Nemani Ndelembatiki. I'll see you next Sunday.
Good evening. I'm Nemani Ndelembatiki of the Fiji Sun. Welcome to Fiji's only TV editorial show. In my say this week, I'm going to speak on the draft village bylaw that is now being circulated. For the next 8 months, a draft village bylaw will be circulated and discussed in consultation meetings throughout the country. Some of the provisions are not new, but this is a comprehensive compilation of village rules designed to promote peace, stability, and economic prosperity in villages. The draft, when read from a holistic perspective, attempts to promote order and discipline in the village. At the same time, it is careful not to be overbearing or too controlling to stifle individual enterprise and entrepreneurship in business and commerce. Village life is based on communalism, everyone working together in family groups, clans, or matangalis, tribes, or yabusas, or the Vanua. This is the village ethos. It's what makes the village environment unique and special. It gives it character and strength. Today, pressures of the modern cash economy and foreign influences challenge the long-term survival or sustainability of some of the cultural practices that make up this village ethos. The big challenge is to strike a balance where the two cultures can coexist harmoniously. There has to be some form of give and take where we recognize the differences and agree on an amicable arrangement which satisfies both sides. For example, in some villages, a day is set aside to clean up the village and carry out community service. This is essential to ensure that the village is kept clean and tidy for health reasons. Because of sickness, work or business commitments, not all male adults will be present. At the moment, in some villages, only the Turangani Koro, or the village headman, can be seen mowing the lawns. Where are the rest of the men? Well, they have their own personal reasons. This should be discussed in the draft bylaw to find a solution. A possible solution is to have a provision that allows male villagers to be able to fulfill their responsibilities on other days that suit them. Or, if they choose to, they can pay a levy if they cannot be present at all. This is especially so for those who hold permanent paid jobs outside the village or engage in commercial activities that require them to be out of the village or on the designated cleanup day. In this way, the village functions are maintained. The objective of the village bylaw to promote self-reliance and independence is applauded. While it may sound harsh that a prerequisite to marriage is a house and a plantation, it teaches a principle that villagers must plan and prepare for marriage to avoid problems later. I think at the same time, young people thinking about getting married should attend village organized seminars to teach them the responsibilities of fatherhood and motherhood in a home in raising children. Too often, we see examples of young couples having little or absolutely no idea on how to run and manage their families. To make matters worse, they rely on their parents or extended relatives to support them. This draft bylaw will help reverse that trend. The cultural practices of kere or borrowing on dinao should be discouraged. The culture of consumption and dependence on others should also be discouraged. The Ministry of Itoke Affairs must be supported in its bid to change the mindset and encourage people to save for rainy day and become self-reliant and independent. For our villages to grow in strength while maintaining communalism, we must lift our game, so to speak. This is Neman Indalembetiki, and that was my say tonight. For more of my views, you can read the Fiji Sun. See you next week.